Hey guys, welcome back to Falcon Central Radio Show on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I'm one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, over at FalcFans.com. I'm joined by my good friend Scott Karasik, who is a contributor at Blogging Dirty. We are back this week to discuss the
I'm
Atlanta
the
Falcons.
editor there, okay?
Okay, I don't know what your exact title is. I asked you a couple of weeks and then it went in one ear and out the other. So
It's
I don't know.
officially the site expert, but I'm definitely a editor.
Okay. Well, there you go, folks. He's the editor at Blogging Dirty. I apologize. Don't want to mess up that title. I know you earned it. We're back to talk about the Falcons' Week 5 win over the Denver Broncos. We're going to preview their Week 6 matchup against the Seattle Seahawks, and we'll answer you guys' mailbag questions throughout the show and at the end. As we usually do, we always usually have a roster move to discuss. This one is the most minor of all roster moves ever discussed on the show.
Yep.
The Falcons have an open practice squad spot because they cut Michael Pilardi, the punter they signed last week, that I don't even remember them signing last week, to replace Davis Tull on the practice squad. So
They've actually just brought back Davis Tull.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, they brought the guy in because Bosher had a hamstring issue. They said, who could we drop? They went to all the practice squad guys and said, hey, if you don't sign for the next couple of days, we'll give you that difference in your contract for the rest of the year. And they were like, all right. And Davis Tull was the one that they chose to be without. So I'm okay with it. I like Davis Tull. I think with time on the practice squad this year, I think you put him in camp next year and see what he can do. People are going to be shocked at how fast that kid is. Just keep him here. Keep him in Atlanta.
Okay. All right. Well, there you go, folks. So there's your roster move update. Let's move on and let's talk some Falcons Broncos. Falcons record now is 4-1. They won their fourth straight game. They beat the Broncos 23-16. That score is closer than the game actually was. It was a pretty one-sided affair with the Falcons sort of dominating on both sides of the ball. I don't know. We dominated on offense, but we certainly outplayed the Broncos defense.
That was about as good of a game as you'll see against that Broncos defense this year.
Yeah. And, some of the key stats from the game was the Falcons pass rush suddenly emerged, 6 sacks. They also got huge contributions from their running backs. I think they exploited the one weakness in the Broncos defense, which was their run defense, which we talked about last week. And they also found out that their linebackers aren't really good at covering fast running backs like Tevin Coleman. And Devontae Freeman and Coleman combined for 286 total yards. That almost was 80% of the team's entire total on Sunday. And they each had a touchdown, which the Falcons only scored 2 touchdowns. So pretty much the offense was Freeman and Coleman, and everybody else was an afterthought by and large. And it worked very well. And so, Scott, I'm curious, what were your thoughts on sort of the offense's ability to overcome the Broncos defense?
I mean, it was just a thing of matchups, and the Falcons have too many targets for any one team to cover. I think I wrote an article this past week before the Broncos game saying that the Falcons pick your poison offense has returned, just because everything I've seen through the first 4 games said, hey, it's not just Julio Jones and everything about Julio Jones like it was in 2015. This year, it's about everybody. It's about Julio. It's about Tevin. It's about Devontae. It's about the run game. If not everything's working, they spread it out and give it to everybody. So I think it's very good to see. I'm excited. I think the Falcons offense is the best it's been in a long, long time. And
yeah,
that's why. I mean, they said, hey, these linebackers can't cover our running backs. Boom. They couldn't cover their running backs. They said, hey, these tight ends can't cover, or these linebackers can't cover our tight end in the flat. Or, hey, we've got 5 good options we can throw on the field all at one time. They can't cover all of them. So pick your poison.
Yep. I think this offense is certainly the most potent that we've seen in quite some time, just because of its explosiveness. And I think that was like the critical ingredient that was missing from that 2012 offense. That 2012 offense was very efficient, very consistent, but it wasn't explosive. And this year's team has probably is not as efficient or as consistent as that one is, but if it's probably a small degree worse, if anything.
Yeah,
But that
2%.
like that explosiveness certainly exceeds what that 2012 offense was. And for them to be able to go into Denver on the road and, basically facing the best defense in the NFL, and, you can make, various people will choose who's the best defense in the NFL. Some people might pick Minnesota, some people pick Denver, some people might pick Seattle, but it's one of those three teams basically. And to basically do what the Falcons did, which was basically control the game from start to finish with their offense, is as impressive an offensive performance that I can remember seeing from the Falcons in a very, very long time. So yeah, I think it was, to me, that the most interesting thing about the game was the concern of going into the week, because I remember talking about this last week, was Denver has a defense that's perfectly constructed to beat our offense, and that was largely because I believed that their cornerbacks would be able to handle our wide receivers, which for the most part they did. But the key was that we were able to get the ball to Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman, particularly Tevin Coleman, and really use him to sort of give us those big plays that we really needed to move the ball against Denver, because their defense is so good that you're not going to be able to put together 10 and 15 play drives and just retain the football in that way. You need to get chunk yardage, and getting the ball to Tevin Coleman, splitting him out wide and getting those three big plays to him was, I think, really the key difference in the game and the main reason why the Falcons won the game. So kudos to Kyle Shanahan for finding a mismatch and exploiting it to the best of this team's abilities. And, I think that's why we're 4-1 instead of 3-2.
I agree. Now, one thing you mentioned was the explosive plays, and the Falcons have 33 plays that you could deem explosive. Now, I'm including runs over 15 yards as well as passes over 20, because it's harder to get a run over 15 yards. And I feel like anytime you do get those runs over 15 yards, it does change the game a good bit. They have 32 of those, and they have 11 plays of 40 yards or more.
Okay.
What's crazy is that those 11 plays aren't coming from the one guy. They're not all coming from Julio Jones. You got, 4 of them are from Julio, 3 are from Tevin Coleman, 2 are from Austin Hooper, and 1's from Devontae Freeman. So you've got a nice mix of people. The fact that it's multiple people destroying defenses together is huge for this offense. And it makes it really tough to guard this offense. Because if you cover Julio, you leave all the other 4 receivers on the field open. If one of those happens to be Tevin Coleman, you have to put a double team on him now too. That's 4 of your 11 defenders guarding 2 guys. And then you have guys like Mohamed Sanu, who may not be the perfect, receiver, but he might be the best fit for that number 2 role in this offense right now. Because he's doing everything that Roddy White could have done. I just wish he wouldn't have fumbled it. Because I think had he not fumbled it there, it would have been the game would have been even more open. Because the Falcons were driving at that point.
Yep. You're right. And I think in previous years we've had, last year, if you go back to last year's, the beginning of last season's, when we were 5-0, the Falcons had a lot of big plays to other people too. But it seemed to me, at least from watching the film of those games, it seemed like most of those big plays were because of Julio Jones opening up opportunities for other guys. Like I remember that Eagles game, Roddy had 2 big plays in that game, and I feel like that was like 90% Julio Jones and and 10% Roddy White making those plays. And then I know Hankerson had a couple of big plays, and Tammy had that big catch against the Giants, which was basically because 7 guys on the Giants defense saw Julio crossing the field and all ran after Julio, and it left Tammy wide open to make like a 40 or 50-yard play. I don't feel like that's necessarily the case this year. Now, I do think that some of these big plays are because Julio is drawing coverage, but I think a lot of them are because guys are just actually doing the thing that they're supposed to be doing and winning on their own. I think that's the key difference, where it doesn't feel like everything revolves around Julio. And it's basically other guys stepping up and getting that supporting cast around him. Because, Scott, like for the last year or so, I've been saying, the biggest problem with the Falcons is they're a one-man team, which is basically if Julio doesn't play well, then they don't win games. And that hasn't necessarily been the case this year, because we've had a couple of games where Julio was basically an afterthought. Really, in probably at least 3, if not 4, these first 5 games, Julio hasn't really made a significant difference in the game, yet the Falcons have won, 3 or 4 of those games. So
I'm going to guess which games. I'm going to guess it's Oakland, Carolina, Oakland, New Orleans, Denver, and Tampa. He really has been an afterthought.
Yeah. And even Denver, yeah. He didn't catch a single pass in the first half.
No, I said Denver.
Yeah, I know. Just
Carolina.
Yeah. So it's nice to see this team being able to open things up and spread the ball around, as you talked about a couple of minutes ago.
And it doesn't hurt that the run game is performing.
Yeah. That's probably the biggest surprise to me, how successful the Falcons running game was, because I remember we talked about this going into during the summer, and the things I remember telling you, Scott, it was like, obviously people know that I didn't necessarily believe that the Falcons were a playoff team this year. I thought they would be competitive, but I didn't think they would be a playoff team. Now, obviously it's week 5, so I'm not going to get too far ahead of ourselves, but they certainly are playing like a playoff team at this juncture. No doubt about that. And I remember telling you, Scott, where it's like if they can run the ball and get a good pass rush, I think they will make the playoffs. We're seeing the pass rush start to emerge this past week and the last 2 weeks. And the running game has certainly been there. And if this keeps up and the pass rush can, keep doing its thing and continuing to affect the game, I think they're going to keep this up going through the rest of the season and get to the playoffs as they should.
Yeah, I mean, I think I remember telling you that I liked Devontae's vision. I thought that was going to be the big reason why he didn't have that second-year regression after that big year, and he's proven me right now. Now, how well he does this week will be huge, because I think the Seahawks have the best run defense in the league. But if the Falcons can average right around 4 yards a carry again this week, that'll be huge. That'll open things up. That'll open up the play action. That's what Matt Ryan's been getting those big plays off of. And I think that'll just help everyone out overall. But, yeah, I mean, you can't go wrong with what's been going on in this offense lately. And how do you cover Tevin Coleman?
I don't know. Wade Phillips doesn't know either. So, yeah.
You can't put a receiver or you can't put a corner on them, because they'll just do a quick out and Tevin can run through a receiver's tackle. You can't put a safety on him because he's faster than him. You definitely can't put a linebacker on him, because as we saw against the 49ers, or not the 49ers, against the Broncos, he just destroyed them. His speed was too much. So there's got to be a way. It's the same thing with Julio Jones. Like, there's ways to stop these guys, but you're putting in way too many resources. So when these guys are on the field together, and you've got that Darren Sproles type in Tevin Coleman. You've got that true number one receiver in Julio Jones, that guy who is arguably the best receiver in the NFL today, and arguably a future Hall of Famer if he can keep up his pace in Julio Jones. And you got Tevin Coleman, and then you got Devontae Freeman out of the backfield as well. It's just too many options for a team to prepare for. So I think the Falcons will be able to move the ball, score some points. I'm just worried about if they can hold up against the pass rush and that offensive line can continue to do what they've been doing and just bullying people. And I think having Alex Mack come in, and I know you're going to be like, Alex Mack wasn't that big of a deal. Center wasn't the big play, blah, 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 blah. But Alex Mack coming in has completely changed the attitude that the offensive line plays with. It was the intangibles that he brought in that you were going, oh, no. Alex Mack's not going to be that big a deal. It wasn't just the snapping. No, it wasn't the snapping. Yeah, Mike Person sucked at snapping the ball, but it wasn't just the snapping that Mike Person sucked at. He couldn't make line calls, and he wasn't leading the offensive line. Matt comes in, first minute in the building, says, hey, I got the line calls, Ryan. Just worry about the coverages. I'll make sure you don't get hit. The offensive line has this attitude of no one lets Ryan get hit, at least not that much compared to past years. And they're just going to bully people right up front. They say, hey, you know what? You don't want us to run the ball on you? Too fucking bad. We're going to run the ball on you. And you saw that this week against Denver.
Yeah. I have no response other than I was wrong.
Thank you.
I underestimated his impact. Yeah. I could try to sit here and explain why I did, but it wouldn't change anything. I don't have a good explanation for it. I was just wrong. Were there any other players that stood out to you, Scott? Because we got a couple of mailbag questions specifically about the Broncos game.
Oh, yeah, Vic Beasley.
We should probably talk about him, yeah.
Something finally clicked that said, hey, run with your speed rush. Just trust your speed rush. Trust your dip move. I don't know if Dwight Freeney pulled him aside and was like, dude, you've got all the speed in the world. Just use it and hammer on that right tackle all day. Or if the coaches were like, hey, you got it. It's right there. It's wide open. Do it. But he did something different. He actually planned his pass rush this week, and you could see it. And, yeah, he did use that spin with no effect at all. But the 3 times he used it, he pulled the tackle right into the guard and almost created a pressure for Derek Shelby on those plays. And Derek Shelby ran his damn lane. And that was huge. Because in the past 4 weeks, Derek Shelby hadn't been able to maintain his lane as a 3-tech, and it's been screwing the whole pass rush up. This week, he held his lane so that the quarterback couldn't step up in the pocket, and Beasley was there 4 times, hammering on Lynch. When you've got your 3-tech doing his job, collapsing the pocket, it really helps out. That's why I kept saying, you got to put in Grady Jarrett, because Grady Jarrett was collapsing the pocket. And with the base unit, they were collapsing the pocket too. Grady Jarrett, Hageman, Tyson Jackson, those guys were collapsing the pocket. Now, Jackson couldn't get around the edge, and neither could Hageman. But Reed almost got something. A couple of times, Reed almost got something. Had Reed not missed the tackle, he would have had a 7th sack on a play action, that bootleg, or if Lynch was just slower. But Lynch is a very athletic quarterback.
Yep. Yeah, I got nothing else to add to that. Beasley played well. He started using his speed rush, which I remember we talked about a couple of weeks ago, was sort of what he needed to do, because he's, at this point in time, that's really all he has. Like, his spin move's not really working, and never really has. He's not a speed to power guy. He's gotten better at that than he was at Clemson. But, at whatever weight he is, 212, 232 or whatever it is, that's probably not going to be his game. It never has been his game. And his game is all about speed and using that speed and that first step and that quickness to get around the edge. And he just wasn't really, when he was using it, it wasn't really working. And it certainly worked against Ty Sambrailo this past week. And, I hope it's something that he continues to utilize, because that needs to be his go-to move. And then, once you can effectively use that edge speed to turn that corner and bend the edge, then you can start to set up inside counter moves and build off of that. But, there are no elite pass rushers that can't bend the edge, basically. Like, you look at guys that you can have guys that are good bull rushers. You can have guys that have, good technique and have other moves, but you're not going to get 15 sacks in the season bull rushing. It's going to be about your speed. And
there was a guy who was able to do that in the past, and that was Michael Strahan. But it wasn't because that's all he did. His base move was a bull rush, and then he would set up 3 different outlets based on that bull rush. He had that club move outside where he bent the edge. He had an inside swim, and then he had a spin. And with those 3 moves, he would destroy people. But I agree with you. You have to bend the edge. You have to be able to bend the edge, because that sets the offensive tackles off balance.
There you go. Okay, let's get to some of these mailbag questions specifically about the Broncos game. I think 4-5 Falcons, 4-5. We answered your question about what Beasley changed to get sacks, speed. Jelani234 asked, did Lynch holding on to the ball contribute to our pass rush looking that good?
No, it didn't. At least not for Vic Beasley sacks. Vic was getting to Lynch in an average of 2.44 seconds. There were those pair of coverage sacks that the Falcons had towards the end of the game. So the difference between 4 and 6 sacks might have been Lynch holding onto the ball. But the way Lynch was getting hit, if it was Trevor Siemian standing there, he would have gotten rocked just as much. It had nothing to do with Paxton Lynch holding onto the ball too long, contributing to the pass rush looking that good.
Well, I hear what you're saying. I think it does have something to do with Paxton Lynch, because he was holding onto the ball too long. And I think it did enhance how good our pass rush, because it gave us probably an extra second to get to the quarterback than it probably would have had Denver had a functional game plan for that week and, design plays to get the ball out of Lynch's hands quickly.
The thing is, he was hitting Lynch right before he would get to that plant.
No, I agree with what you're saying. Like, I agree with you. We still would have gotten a bunch of sacks, and we still would have gotten a bunch of pressure, even if Lynch was getting rid of the ball quickly. But I do think it did contribute like we would have been here had our pass rush would have been here if he had been not holding onto the ball. But because he was holding onto the ball, it was here. So yeah, that's all I'm saying. Similar question, Big Boy Brewski asks, is the Falcons D-line improving, or is it a bad Broncos O-line, or both?
I'm going to go with both. The Broncos offensive line honestly wasn't that bad from the left tackle to the right guard. They weren't that bad. They were actually doing pretty well. Dwight Freeney's a tough guy to stop all game, as we've seen. He got 2 half sacks this week that any other week probably would have been 2 full sacks. Claiborne finally started getting going. Vic Beasley getting going, though, opened things up for the rest of that offensive line, because they started double teaming and triple teaming Beasley, and then Freeney had open abilities. So I think the Falcons' defensive line at least is starting to look a little better. I think if you look at their schedule, a big component of that is that they played Tampa Bay, New Orleans, and Oakland to start the season. And those 3 teams actually have decent offensive lines. New Orleans may not have a great offensive line, but they've got Drew Brees, who sits there and throws the ball away really quickly. So you might as well just say, screw it. Like, I'm done. It's honestly no big deal, because New Orleans will always be a team that Atlanta doesn't get a lot of sacks and hits on, because Drew Brees is one of those guys that just gets the ball out quick. Now, Carolina, Denver, there was no reason why the Falcons were hitting Carolina as much as they were. Oher was out, but they were destroying Remmers. They were destroying the other guy on the other side. They were destroying the guys on the inside too, though. And then in Denver, that's when everything seemed to click for the entire unit. So hopefully it sticks for the rest of the year. Hopefully Vic Beasley finishes the year with like 15 sacks. That way Aaron and I can both be like, man, we were wrong. Although I was like, he'll get 10, he'll be a decent second-year player. And Aaron was like, no, he'll get 6.
No, I was like, he'll get like 8. That's what I was like.
Aaron would be like, he's going to get 6. Well, he's already about over halfway there, Aaron. I hope he finishes with 8 at the end of the Seattle game. That'd be amazing.
I think it's both. I think the Falcons D-line is improving. Dare I say maybe Brian Cox isn't the worst human being alive as many people said he was.
I read something this week that I forgot about. They moved Richard Smith to work with the defensive line during the week, and the linebackers are basically just Ulbricht's baby now. So maybe that has an effect too.
Maybe. I think the Broncos sort of certainly contributed to the Falcons' pass rush looking as good as it did. They didn't really chip anybody. They left their offensive line basically on an island, and because they didn't really have a game plan that sort of took things off of Lynch's plate, a lot of those times where he dropped back, he was looking for Sanders or Thomas to break open down the field, which sort of enhanced the Falcons' pass rush because he wasn't getting rid of the ball quickly. They didn't run a lot of check downs and crossing patterns designed to get him, to make simple reads. So I think that also contributed to the Falcons' D-line looking as good as it did. But I do think the D-line is improving. I think Shelby has certainly picked up his play the last couple of weeks. Freeney has always been solid. I think Claiborne has always been solid. I think Jared has been fine. I think the real difference is Shelby and Beasley are starting to step up more so than anything else. And so now you have 4 at least competent, if not good, pass rushers now, as opposed to 2 that we were going with the first 3 or so games of the season. And I think that's the difference between where we are today and where we were a month ago. Big Boy Brewski asks, Falcons player performance that exceeded your expectations versus the Broncos.
I'm going to be just upfront about it and say Vic Beasley, but if I'm going to go with someone who's not Vic Beasley, Kamal Ishmael. He played middle linebacker and weak side linebacker the whole game. And I don't know, they just look really good. Ishmael and Reynolds. I don't know how Reynolds looked as good as he did, but those two both looked really solid. So I thought the linebacking core, for as much shit as we were talking about him last week, Reynolds looked solid. He wrapped up on his tackles. He did his job. Ishmael, he was Ishmael. I mean, he was exactly what I thought he'd be as a weak side linebacker, but I didn't actually think I'd be right because that change doesn't come easy. And he just did his job, and he did his job well. And they had Keanu Neal in the box most of the time, and that helped out against the run game because Keanu Neal's a beast. So I thought the combination of those 3 really helped out a lot. Oh, and they played Vic and Bass. It was just a great game all around for the linebacking core. I was very surprised when I went back and watched the All-22 how well they were flowing. They were flowing like they were veteran linebackers. And Reynolds might be something that is good to have for 5-6 years. He might be that Ike Reese type that you keep him on there because he's a good special teamer and he's a good backup linebacker.
Yeah, I think I think the linebackers and Ishmael and all those guys, not to take anything away from them, but I do think the Broncos really didn't attack them probably as much as they probably should have. So I feel like they were, not to say they were given a pass, but they didn't really have to do a whole lot because there's nothing really that the Broncos did other than basically run the ball up the middle that they had to defend against. So I do think those guys played well, but I also think the Broncos did nothing to really challenge them. They didn't run. They were running like maybe 3 play action plays. They probably had like 2 crossing patterns.
To be fair,
So
the tight end's kind of low in Denver.
yeah, no, but I think if I was constructing a game plan, if I was the Broncos coaching staff, I would have had Sanders and Thomas running a bunch of crossing patterns. I would have had ran a bunch of screens and tried to get those guys in space and see if they could make plays in space. And I would have run a lot of play action, a lot of bootlegs that designed to suck up those guys and sort of open up opportunities for those tight ends and backs and wide receivers over the middle. And then the Broncos really didn't do any of that. So I feel like, I'm not trying to take anything away from those guys playing, but I do feel like the Broncos made it easier on them, I would say. To answer Bruce's question, the player that exceeded my expectation, it was Tevin Coleman. We've seen Coleman play well, but he was the MVP of the offense. I didn't expect that to happen. We've seen him play well, as I said, and be a major contributor to this offense, but to basically essentially take over the game and be the best player on the field, that exceeded my expectations. So yeah. Big Boy Brewski asked, was it just me or was Von Miller not on the field that much, or the no huddle had him gassed?
I think they were trying to gas him out most of the game. When he was on the field and they had a box call, you would see Ryan switch to a run. A lot of times just be like, hey, you know what? Box call, fuck it. Let's run it right at him. And they would run it right at Wolf and Von Miller. They would do that quite a bit during the game. And it was fun to see. It was nice actually seeing the Falcons just say, you know what? We don't care how good this guy is. We're going to take him on head on. So I thought they game planned him well. And I thought it was a combination of, he had one sack and maybe one other hit, and that was it. Which for Von Miller is not a good game. And I think a lot of it also had to do with Ryan Schrader being a very good right tackle.
Yeah. I think Miller played well, but I think, similar to Khalil Mack in week 2, who also played well, he didn't take over the game. And I think that was the key. That was all the Falcons wanted to do, was prevent him from taking over the game. He made some plays. He proved quite the match for DeMarco and Toilolo and Schrader at times, as we sort of expected. But at no point did you feel like he took over the game. Was he not on? I'm looking at the snap counts, and he played a normal amount of snaps. So I can't necessarily say he wasn't on the field. It just because the Falcons game plan and ran the ball, threw the ball to the running backs, got the ball out quickly. It was designed to sort of minimize his impact on the game, and it was effective. So I don't feel like, there was anything wrong with Von Miller. I just think the Falcons were able to execute their game plan to a high enough level where it wasn't, he wasn't able to assert his dominance on the game. Okay, guys, let's move on to next week's game. We're going to play the Seattle Seahawks. This is another game with the Falcons 2-game road stand. They're going to be out west, I think, all of this week to, get prepared. We'll see how that works out for them. Seahawks are 3-1. They're coming off a bye. Their only loss was sort of a nondescript loss to the Rams in week 2. Their defense is still the Seattle Seahawks defense. But, the good thing is the Falcons just played one of the best defenses in the league. So it's not as if this game is going to be some suddenly huge challenge for them to overcome, because they've already shown that they can beat a good defense. So, that's really going to be the key, just like it was last week. Can the Falcons offense, score enough points and sort of keep the ball and limit their turnovers enough to win the game? And will Seattle's defense stop them? Now, I do think Seattle's offense is probably going to be a lot better than Denver's offense was on Sunday. So that will, we'll see how good they are. But if the Falcons defense is able to play like they did against Denver, that will be a significant significantly better accomplishment than it was against Denver because, as I said, I don't feel like Denver's coaching staff showed up at all last week.
The Seattle offense, their line is decent at run blocking. Not great, but decent. And their tight ends are good. Luke Wilson, Jimmy Graham. You can't take anything away from them. Doug Baldwin's looking like a number one receiver for once. But I just don't know if that offensive line can really block the way that they need to for that offense to be at their best. Like, if the Seahawks had a decent offensive line, they'd have an offense right there scary, just as scary as the Falcons. But they don't. They have an awful offensive line. They have one of the worst, if not the worst, in the entire NFL. Justin Britt looks okay. Jermaine Ifedi, he's a rookie and he looks like a rookie. Gary Gilliam looks awful. Mark Lewinsky looks awful. Bradley Sowell is probably the worst left tackle in the NFL. That entire group. I'm going to love watching Dwight Freeney go up against Bradley Sowell all day because he's going to destroy him all day. The question is whether they can chase down Russell Wilson because that guy is fast. He is tough to catch up to. I think if the Falcons can get the pressure on Russell Wilson and force some bad throws, that'll help out a lot. They may not sack him at all, but as long as they can get near him and force bad throws, that'll be huge. The run game is really where the Falcons need the linebackers. If they can get their linebackers going, if they can get Deion Jones and Devondre Campbell back this week, especially Campbell, because you need someone to match up with Jimmy Graham, and that guy is Campbell more than anybody else. You can get Deion Jones and Campbell back, that'll be huge because Neal and Campbell and Jones haven't played together for a full game yet, and I want to see them together this week. Now, on offense, there's not really a lot of holes on the Seahawks depth chart, except maybe Jeremy Lane and their slot receivers. I think if you want to attack them, you've got to attack them with Julio Jones going against Jeremy Lane all day because there's no way Lane can hold up. And if Sherman says, oh, they're running away from me, whatever, who cares? Put Julio on top of Sherman, have him go deep 2 plays, and Sherman will be like, all right, I'm done. Just like he was in 2013. Or 2012, sorry. Sherman's good, but Julio Jones can beat him. Julio Jones is the one receiver that Sherman can't cover.
Yeah, I watched the Jets-Seahawks game, and Sherman, I think he had like 2 picks in that game, but he really struggled against Brandon Marshall. Marshall beat him a bunch of times. Now, Sherman made up for it with the interceptions. But, yeah, I think my expectation is Seattle will shadow Julio with Sherman when he lines up on the outside, but I do think the Falcons would be smart to try to maximize Julio's snaps in the slot this week, just because, as you say, Lane. I think Lane is a good slot corner, but I don't think he can cover Julio. I think their other corner, Deshaun Shedd, is a solid player, but I also don't think he could cover Julio. But I don't think he'll get that opportunity because I think Sherman will shadow him. So I'll be curious to see if the Falcons can sort of get other guys, whether it's Sanu, whether it's Gabriel, whether it's Robinson, whether it's Hardy, against Shedd and sort of exploit him. He's a big guy. He's a physical guy. But I think a speedy guy like Robinson or Gabriel could give him a lot of trouble. I know Austin did some things against him a couple of weeks ago. So I feel like that's a matchup that the Falcons can exploit. I think Scott nailed it. I think, the first thing with the Seahawks, you got to stop the run. Christian Michael has been having a pretty good season. If you can stop the run, then, that takes, half of their offense off the field. The other key is you got to get pressure on Russell Wilson. Now, as Scott said, the offensive line for Seattle is not very good. But the difference is, I think Seattle has done a much better job utilizing Russell Wilson given his injury. He's been dealing with a knee injury. He's been dealing with a ankle sprain. And he doesn't have quite the mobility, or at least he hasn't had the first month of the season. And they've designed a lot of plays that were designed to get the ball out quickly. So it's not a lot of the normal Seahawks stuff where it's Russell takes a 5 or 7 step drop, waits for someone to get downfield, scrambles around and throws it. Now, the interesting thing is going to be to see if the bye week makes him a little bit more mobile so that they can do some of that stuff a little bit more than they have so far this year. If that's the case, then that's going to be a problem for the Falcons pass rush, because it's not only getting pressure on Wilson, it's corralling him and keeping him contained in a pocket. And I think a big part of that is going to be the interior defensive line. And I'm looking at you, Grady Jarrett. I'm looking at you, Babineau, and I'm looking at you, Derek Shelby, and to a lesser extent, Adrian Claiborne, being able to get that push up the middle, because that's the key to containing a quarterback in the pocket. Because, yeah, sure, you can have Vic Beasley screaming off the edges and Dwight Freeney screaming off the edges, but then if Russell Wilson can just step up and slide out of the pocket, he's going to be able to find those story lanes. And that's basically what Drew Brees has been doing for the past decade. And it has, as we've seen, carve up the Falcons defense for the most part in that decade. So I think the other things that you'll have to deal with on offense, that at least, I don't think the Seahawks receivers are all that good. Like they're all competent, Lockett and Richardson and Baldwin, but I'm not worried about our cornerbacks dealing with those guys. To me, the main concern when they throw the ball is Jimmy Graham, and they got CJ Spiller a little bit more involved. And he's the type of running back that tends to give our guys trouble. Like, I feel like Keanu Neal, Jimmy Graham is a different animal, but I feel like Keanu Neal has played well enough that I don't fear Jimmy Graham like I normally would. But I do wonder if Campbell doesn't play this week, then, Spiller could create some issues going against Deion Jones and the other linebackers if he can sort of get his speed out in space. So I feel like, basically it's the running game, pressuring Wilson, corralling Wilson, and if we can cover Graham and Spiller, then I think our defense should be fine against the Seahawks offense. I think, offensively, I think it's the same thing. The Seahawks defense, I know we got a couple mailbag questions, like what are the Seahawks weaknesses on defense? How do you attack them? Their defense is basically the same as ours. It's hard to throw outside against them, against their cover three. It's hard to throw deep against their cover three. The way you attack them is you attack them up the middle. Play action, get those linebackers sucked up. So, historically they've struggled just like us covering running backs and tight ends. Obviously not to the degree that our defense has struggled historically doing that. But, I feel like Coleman and Tammy and Freeman, we're going to need big weeks from several of those guys, Hooper as well. And I think that's how you sort of attack the Seahawks defense and run the football, keep their pass rush from teeing off on Matt Ryan. Don't turn the ball over, because their defense, hasn't gotten all the turnovers that they usually get. But, I think this is a big week where, they're going to hope to try to create some short field opportunities for their offense and give those guys positive field position. So, I think basically it's the same game plan we had against the Broncos. Just do it again.
Yeah. Although I could see Julio having a big day against Sherman, just because I think Julio matches up well.
Yeah.
He just has everything that Sherman struggles with. He's got a combination of speed and size, and he runs damn near perfect routes. And he can build separation against Sherman. But I do think that on defense, if Neal is 100%, if Campbell is 100%, they can stop the tight ends. I'm with you on worrying about Christine Michael.
Yeah, I mean, Seattle's plan is going to basically be we're going to win. We're going to rush Matt Ryan. We're going to stop the run. We're going to pressure Matt Ryan, and we're going to create some turnovers off of that. That's basically what their game plan is going to be. So, basically the Falcons are going to try to run the ball, protect Matt Ryan, and not turn the ball over. And so if they can do that, they should win this game. If they don't, then, then it's put on the defense's shoulders, and, they have been improving, but I would sleep much sounder if the game doesn't come down to our defense having to make plays. That's what I'll say.
I agree. Unless the defense magically does the same exact thing it did against the Broncos, I'm with you.
Yeah, I mean, like, they could. Like, I could certainly imagine a scenario where we see the defense playing very well this week. And, you won't have me on next week's show talking about how the Seahawks offensive game plan was bad because, they actually have competent coaches, unlike Denver.
I think Denver's got very competent coaches. I think they thought the rookie could do more than he could.
I don't think they have. Well, I would have agreed with you until I saw the game Sunday because they didn't make any adjustments. So, I have a hard time giving you the benefit of the doubt when you don't make adjustments. But yeah. So I mean, like the player, the player that scares me is Michael Bennett because they move him all over the place, and they're gonna use him to create mismatches. I don't think Bennett has been playing quite as well as he has in the past. He seems a little heavy to me. I don't know if he bulked up, like put on like 10 pounds or something like that this offseason. I don't know. But, he's the type of guy, they'll line him up inside, they'll line him up outside, right side, left side. It doesn't really matter. Basically, they probably will move him around until they find a matchup that they think they can exploit, which I would probably assume is going to be inside either against Chester or Levitri. And if he does exploit that, then that's going to be a problem because when he's really good, he's really, really good. So that's the one guy that I feel like the Falcons need to get a hat on him. And if we can block him and we can get out, if Mac or any of our guards can leak out to that second level and get a body on Bobby Wagner, I feel like we'll have a good day on offense.
I can agree.
Okay. All right, let's get into some of these mailbag questions. I think we answered a couple of them already. All right, let's go piece by piece. Let's see if we get it. Okay. 45 Falcons 45 asks, what are the Seahawks strengths and weaknesses? You got anything else to add to that, Scott?
I mean, other than really covering tight ends and running backs out of the backfield and things that the Falcons do well that other teams may not do well, like use 10 different people in the offensive or in the passing game. I don't really know what their weaknesses are. The one game this season that I was like, man, the Falcons are definitely losing that one was the Seahawks. Like in my head, I was like, there's no way the Falcons are going to win this game. And even now, I'm still kind of feeling like, yeah, the Falcons are good, and it's going to be a test, but I still don't expect them to win. And I'm okay with that because you're going to Seattle. Seattle's coming off a bye. It's right after you played a physical game against the Broncos, and the Falcons are a little banged up right now, and the Seahawks are coming off a bye. So, like, everything is stacked against the Falcons right now. Now, the Falcons can win. I'm not sitting here going to tell you, like, yeah, that's how you do it, because I don't know. The way that the Rams beat Seattle was basically Russell Wilson got hurt and their defense just stopped the offense, the Seattle offense from doing anything. And I don't think the Falcons have the kind of defense that can just stuff the Seattle offense from doing anything right now.
Yeah, I'm basically on the same page, Scott. Like, I think the Falcons are certainly capable of winning if they play their A game. I certainly think they can win this game. At some point, I'm sort of expecting them not to play their A game, though. So, like, that's the thing. I don't know if the travel is going to get to them this week, so that, not sleeping in your own bed this week is going to affect them and they come out, a little sluggish on Sunday. I don't know. But, eventually I think one of these games, like I can't expect them to just keep playing their best football as we've seen these last couple of weeks every weekend. That's just not really possible. And as a longtime Falcon fan, I've been trained to not expect that every week. And the fact that we've gotten 4 straight weeks of it, to me, is mind-blowing, because I've never seen that from a Falcons team, really, ever.
And I'd be okay if this week was the week that they had just an off week.
Yeah. Do you have anything else to add to how the Falcons attack the Seattle defense?
I mean, run the ball. Just pound it up the middle. See what you can do. I mean, there's not really a great way to attack that Seattle defense. They're strong everywhere, except maybe their number 2 corner. And their, strong side linebacker. I think Cassius Marsh kind of blows. I don't think he's very good at all. So, I mean, if you can attack those guys specifically, but it's really tough to do. It is really tough to do. And they can cover tight ends effectively. They can cover running backs effectively out of the backfield. Now, maybe you try to overload them. You run Hooper and, Jones and Coleman and Sanu out there and just have your big, strong, fast group, your biggest, strongest, fastest receivers, and just say, we're going to beat you size and speed on size and speed. And maybe that's how you do it. But I can't think of anything other than maybe running those 4 guys out a majority of the offensive pass plays.
Okay. Luke asks, how will Shanahan try to beat Seattle's cover 3?
I mean, they know Seattle's cover 3. They know exactly how to beat it. You got to run combo routes. You got to run different kinds of post routes. The one thing that Atlanta did in 2012 that they haven't, or that I haven't seen them do against Seattle since, was pass protect long enough for Matt Ryan to hit those post routes. And I think this year might be a little different because you've got Alex smack in the middle who can help kind of call the different coverages and make sure, or the protections, and make sure that you've got the right guys protecting. So I think that's going to be how you beat that cover 3. You got to pass protect, let these late developing routes develop, and then go from there.
Yeah, the cover 3 tends to be a little soft against crossing patterns and in digs and in breaking routes. So I think, we need to see a bunch of those. Jelani234 asks, what's the biggest factor in getting a win in Seattle?
The pass rush. If you can get there and you can hit Russell Wilson and make him feel those injuries that he's already got, that's how you win. Because if he's feeling them and you stop him, you slow him down, and he can't hit those late breaking routes, he can't hit, those tight ends, and this is how the Rams beat them, is their pass rush just was on Russell all day. Because that Seattle offensive line is garbage. The Seattle offensive line is the worst offensive line the Falcons will play this year. They need to be able to get pressure every single play in order to make this game close.
Yeah, I'll go a little bit broader. I think it's winning the line of scrimmage. I think it's on both sides of the ball, stopping their pass rush and getting pressure on the quarterback.
I won't disagree there because that's what they did against Denver.
Yep. Your boy J94 asks, when will the Falcons get respect and what part of the Seahawks defense can we expose?
I don't give a damn if the Falcons get respect. I really don't. They're not playing for respect. They're playing for a Super Bowl. So, respect in one hand, shit in the other, see what fills up first. That's how I feel about respect.
There you go. Yeah, I'm on the same way. Like, it's nice to turn on NFL Network or ESPN and hear them talking about your team. But at the end, I don't really watch those shows for analysis or anything like that or insights.
I watch them for scores and highlights.
Yeah, so it's like I don't really care what, Chris Carter or Solomon Wilcox or, Heath Evans or, any of those people say about the Falcons. Like, I don't really care what their opinion is. It's nice to hear, but I don't really care. So, when will the Falcons get respect? If they beat Seattle, I'm sure they'll get a little bit more. Yeah. So, what really matters is, are you getting respect on like February 4th? Because that usually means you won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, that's all I care about too.
Your boy J94 asks, will Vic get 4 sacks? LOL, the Seahawks O-line is bad.
If Vic gets 4 sacks against the Seahawks offensive line, I'll give you credit on Twitter and be like, dude, this guy just predicted it. I'm not expecting him to get 4 sacks. I'm not expecting him to get 1 sack. I just want to see him get pressure again, the way that he was getting pressure this last game. He was continually forcing Paxton Lynch up in the pocket, even when he wasn't sacking him. He was forcing him to take shorter drops, even when he wasn't sacking him. So I think as long as he can continue to create pressure and create plays for the defense, that's all we need from Vic.
Yeah, I would be surprised if he has another monster game because I sort of expect Seattle to do what Denver didn't do and chip him. Little simple adjustment that you would do when after your right tackle is probably giving up 2 or 3 sacks, you might want to chip. Denver didn't do it. I think Seattle will probably be like, yeah, we're not going to let this guy take over the game. So we're going to give Garrett Gilliam help. I think that will potentially create opportunities for other guys like Freeney and others and Claiborne on the opposite side. And, I think we might see a big game from somebody else on this D-line, maybe a multi-sack game for Freeney. But I wouldn't expect Vic to have another monster performance. He's capable of doing it, but I don't expect it to happen. The Dirty Bird 1998 asks, is Gilliam a good matchup for Beasley this week?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Gilliam's slow. He's slow. He doesn't have good technique. He's very heavy-footed. He has trouble getting back into his drop. I think if there's another matchup for Beasley to exploit, it's this one. The only reason, again, why I don't think he would have a great game is I'm with Aaron. I think they're going to game plan, and I think they're going to have Christy Michael come in and chip pretty much every play.
Yeah. Champagne Sappy asks, how does Seattle's corners look beyond Richard Sherman? Is attacking them perhaps the way getting after Seattle?
Yeah, I think if you can pass protect and you got enough time, try to see if you can hit Julio, try to see if you can hit Taylor Gabriel, try to see if you can hit Sanu. I think those are the 3 guys that you got to watch for this game is all the corners after Richard Sherman. Because every corner that's not named Richard Sherman on that team sucks.
Yeah, I wouldn't go so far as to say they suck, but I do feel like they can be exploited. I think Sheet is basically a Brandon Browner type who doesn't get penalized as much. A big guy matches up pretty well with big receivers, but smaller, faster, quicker guys he tends to struggle with. I think Lane is solid in the slot. He's always been a functional to good nickel cornerback for them. I haven't really seen anything from him this year that makes me change my opinion. But then again, I haven't, other than one game, I haven't really watched that much Seattle this year. But yeah, I think, we're going to need to either move Julio around to sort of create better matchups for him. Because I agree with what Scott said. Julio can beat Sherman, but why if he can beat Sherman, he can get 100 yards against Sherman, but he get 200 yards against Jeremy Lane and 200 yards against Deshaun Shedd. So I feel like it's smarter to try to get him matched up against those guys than Richard Sherman. But if the Falcons don't do that for whatever reason, I do feel like this could be a big week for someone like Gabriel or Robinson or even Sanu to sort of step up and pick up some of the slack. Similar question. Champagne Sappy asks, how do you think Seattle will guard Julio? Is leaving Sherman on an island with him something they consider?
Man, if they leave Sherman if they leave Sherman on an island with Julio, Julio will run deep every play. And there will be one play where the offensive line holds up and Julio will make Sherman look like a punk. because Sherman does not have the raw speed to keep up with Julio. He just doesn't.
Yeah, I mean Sherman's tactic is going to be he's going to try to jam Julio, slow him down off the line of scrimmage because Scott's right, he can't keep up with him speed wise. So if he misses a jam, he's screwed. Brandon Marshall had a big play against him. I can't remember for how many yards in the Jets game because basically he beat the jam, and it was like a 30 or 40-yard play or something like that. So, and Brandon Marshall isn't a burner by any means.
And worst case, you're gonna have Julio just. Worst case, you'll have Sherman pull Julio down, and boom, there's a penalty.
Yeah, I mean, like it's not really like they're putting him on an island because they're going to be playing cover 3, and so basically Sherman's responsibility is going to be prevent a deep pass outside the numbers. So, like, I think basically, they have used Sherman as a shadow corner this year a lot more than they have in the past. I wouldn't expect that to change. I mean, if you're going to shadow Sherman on Brandon Marshall, why wouldn't you shadow him on Julio? Especially when the alternative is getting Julio matched up on guys like Lane and Chad. But obviously, I don't think Sherman's going to play in the slot. So if the Falcons move Julio into the slot, then that creates a mismatch. And we saw this work to great success last year in the Week 16 win over the Panthers. The first time we played the Panthers, the Falcons didn't really utilize it. I think Julio had maybe like 5 reps in the slot. And then, like, in Week 16, he had like 20 or something like that. Probably I'm overestimating. But he had a lot of work in the slot, and a lot of his targets came when he was in the slot in that game. So why wouldn't you do it? Big Boy Brucey asks, what are some matchups to watch versus Seattle?
Wherever Julio's matching up on, wherever they match up Coleman against, the Falcons' running game against that run defense. That run defense is good. But looking at who the Seahawks have played, they haven't exactly played the best running offenses. They played the Dolphins, the Rams, the 49ers, and the Jets. None of those say, hey, this is a great rushing offense. So maybe it's a combination of them being a good, maybe not great run defense and really weak competition. Because the Jets have, the Jets in their run offense, they're 12th, not great. Atlanta's 8th. Atlanta's averaging a third of a yard more, which is a lot. And when you're talking about averages, they've played against the Rams, who are the second worst in the league. They've played against the 49ers, who are 23rd. And they've played against the Dolphins, who are 18th. So they haven't played a rushing attack as good as Atlanta's. That's as committed to running the ball as Atlanta is. And I think Atlanta could have a good day on the ground, especially if they focus more on Devontae carrying the ball than Tevin. What's nice about having 2 good running backs is who can beat teams with speed, and who can beat teams with power and running it right up the middle and their vision. And I think running it right up the middle, Atiba Rubin's okay, Jerron Reed's okay, Tony McDaniel's okay, but I think they can get through that defensive line effectively and create a lot.
Yeah, I'll do the opposite side. I think, whoever's blocking Michael Bennett, particularly Chris Chester, the last time they played each other, Bennett ate his lunch. Alex Mack against Bobby Wagner in the run game. Keanu Neal versus Jimmy Graham. And probably Deion Jones against C.J. Spiller. I think those are some matchups to keep an eye on. And obviously, Vic Beasley against Garrett Gilliam and Freeney against Sowell. Mave2124 asks, how can we give our O-line weak link Chester help this week?
I mean, you got to have Alex Mack look on the line and be like, hey, this isn't a matchup Chester's going to win. If it is Michael Bennett, and then just adjust the protection and go help him out. It's on Alex Mack. It really is. I mean, this is a week that you test out his line calls and say, hey, this is the guy that's going to make sure Matt Ryan stays healthy. And maybe Chester can win some of those one-on-ones because technically the offense does look a lot better in pass protection this year. And it's not just because Alex Mack is there in the middle. It's because Levitri's holding his block. Chester's holding his block. The guys up front are doing their jobs a lot better than they have been in the past. And it's all the entire line. It's Jake Matthews, it's Ryan Schrader, it's Alex Mack, it's all of them. They're all doing a better job this year than they have in the past. Levitri looks like he's back in Buffalo. I've been very impressed with him this year. So that's all I've got. Hopefully, if they need to, they can put Devontae in, have him chip if he needs to, have him kind of say, oh, hey, there's Michael Bennett, and chip him and just let Chester have a nice straightforward block on him. But other than that, I mean, the Falcons just got to make sure they know where the best pass rushers are every play.
Yep. Typically teams slide their protections left. So maybe we'll do more sliding to the right. That's basically it. Yeah. 4-5 Falcons 4-5 asks, how does Dan Quinn's knowledge of Seattle's defense affect this game?
I mean, it gives Atlanta an advantage, but at the same time, it gives Seattle an advantage because the defense that Dan Quinn runs is pretty much the same defense that Pete Carroll runs. So at this point, there's not really an advantage either way. It doesn't affect the game as much as it just kind of helps Atlanta. Maybe it helps Atlanta a little more because they know Seattle's personnel better in scouting than Seattle knows Atlanta's. But Seattle has had a nice long transition from what they were. I mean, they've got a bunch of new starters. Frank Clark's new. He's not really a starter, but he's their key pass rusher. Quentin Jefferson's new. He's been doing really well. You've got Jeremy Lane, who's now starting. I mean, but for the most part, I think it's just he knows their personnel now.
Yeah, I think you're right. It doesn't really. Both teams basically run very similar offenses and defenses, if not identical. The differences are small, not really big, not schematic differences. It's just personnel. So it doesn't really. That doesn't help one team or the other. And it's not as if, with the exception of the Broncos, most teams kind of know how to attack the cover three. It's just, it's a defense that's simplified and, it's more about execution as opposed to scheming because it creates sort of limited windows and whatnot to throw into and to run against. So, I don't think, scheme is necessarily going to be the difference in this game. I think it's going to come down to execution. Okay, let's get into the rest of the mailbag questions. 4-5 Falcons 4-5 asks, why is the Falcons defense always terrible in the second half of games?
I mean, so the Falcons have what? 3 times they've allowed teams back in the fourth quarter to at least make it look like it was competitive. Against the Saints, they did it. Against the Panthers, they did it. Against the Broncos, they did it. I'm just checking now to see if they did it against the Raiders. It might be 4 straight games that they've done it, where they're just like, hey, you know what? We're up by 14. We're going to play soft. Yeah, against the Raiders, they did it. So they've done it 4 straight weeks. They get up by 14-plus points. And they play this soft zone because they're like, hey, we're going to win. We're up by 14 points. And it's probably ill-fated. It's probably not the best idea. But they end up winning anyway. They probably shouldn't have let the Broncos back in, but the Broncos had one drive that they had that was good all day that ended in a touchdown. It was just a good overall defense. And I think you just let them – at the end, they let them in, but they forced them to take 5 minutes off the clock. So I think the whole point is they're trying to keep teams from scoring quick. They let them have everything they want underneath, and then they just hope it can stay from there.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's no secret that, with the exception of the Broncos, the other teams have coaching staffs too. So, like, they get paid to do their job. So it's not as if, it's very hard in the NFL to play 60 minutes of completely dominant football. Usually you can do 45 minutes. So I feel like, against the Broncos, it wasn't necessarily, I think that's being nitpicky, talking about the defense letting them back in the game. They pretty much won the game, and allowing one scoring drive is not some horrible thing. I think with other teams this year, and historically speaking, I think the main reason why is because the Falcons haven't really been good at pass rushing. And what happens is when they were winning under Mike Smith and early this season, they would get these leads, and that's the point where the other team starts to get one-dimensional and starts throwing the ball a little bit more. And because the Falcons haven't really been great historically and through the early part of this season rushing the quarterback, they can't really do anything at that point to really stop those teams from doing that. And so it allows teams to call their way back into games. I remember, when Indianapolis was at its height, they built their offense around, okay, Peyton Manning's going to give us leads. And then Freeney and Mathis and all those guys are going to just be able to tee off on the quarterback, and that worked for them. And, the way they ended up losing a lot of those games is when they didn't get early leads and they had to, their defense couldn't stop anybody. So I feel like if and when the Falcons pass rush keeps playing like it did against Denver on a consistent basis week to week, you won't see these sort of second half collapses to the same degree. Now, you'll still see, if we're up 14 points with 5 minutes to go, there's probably a good chance that, we'll give up a score or, because it just happens in the NFL. That's just the way it always works in the NFL, whether you're the Falcons or really any other team. Garbage time points happen quite a bit. It's a gambler's nightmare. There's been many people in Vegas that have lost fortunes over garbage time touchdowns. So it just happens. Wizzle831 asks, do you believe the O-line and offense as a whole can keep this high-level play all year long? And do you see the defense getting better if we can get healthy and have all three rookies playing?
I mean, I think that the defense can get way better if they have all three rookies playing. I think it would help out a lot to have Jones and Campbell and Neal and just all the speed that they bring. I think the O-line and the offense can keep up the high level of play as long as they don't realize that they're the Falcons and, have to have a couple bad games and they just magically turn into a team that doesn't screw up. I mean, this is the Falcons. They're going to screw up at some point, right? I think we're all used to it. There's always going to be that 1 or 2 games at a minimum that were just like, man, we did not show up. The Falcons did not play today. And it's gonna happen, but I just don't see a single way that I hope it doesn't happen this year. Put it that way.
Yeah, I remember we were at this point last year, and I was sort of in the same mindset of waiting for the other shoe to drop, just because I thought the Falcons were sort of getting by. They got off to that 5-0 start because I think they were kind of getting by the skin of their teeth. They were, making a play here or there at the end of the game to sort of, snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. And in several of those games, pretty much like the entire first 4 or 5 weeks of the season, I think they maybe had one quarter where they had the lead in any of those games, maybe 1 or 2 quarters out of like 20. So I don't feel quite the same way this year. I guess if I'm worried about anything, I'm worried about injuries sort of hitting and hurting them on offense, particularly because I feel like we've been relatively healthy this year. I know Julio and Sanu has missed time, but I feel like, there's much scarier injuries than what we've experienced so far. So that's the one thing that probably more concerns me if we're going to see this team make a major decline. I do feel like the defense can get better, particularly if the pass rush continues to build upon itself. I kind of feel like the linebackers in the secondary kind of, at this point, kind of is what they are. So, like, I think guys can get better, but at this point, I'm just kind of like, I'm fine with the linebackers in the secondary at this point. You know, they've given up a lot of yards and a lot of scores, but like I don't really worry about them too much. It's really, to me, more about the D-line, if they can step up and play much better football, if the defense is going to make big strides. Yeah, so like, you know, I expect a little bit of downward trend for the offense because it's hard to maintain this for 16 games, but I don't expect them to fall off of a cliff unless there's catastrophic injuries, which, knock on wood, I'm not hoping for. Chief Gonzalez 2 asks, how magical has Shanny been? I'll be the first to admit the hiring was random, but perhaps this is what DQ was talking about.
I think people talked a lot of crap about Shanahan because they didn't really know what the hell they were talking about. They didn't understand that maybe Shanahan wasn't dealt the best of cards pretty much anywhere he went. He was given a late run Donovan McNabb, a late run Rex Grossman, and then a rookie year and second year RG3. He was given Matt Schaub and made Matt Schaub look great. He was given, you know, he wasn't really given a lot of great quarterbacks to work with in Cleveland either. And I know it's Cleveland. They don't have quarterbacks. They suck, blah, blah, blah. But maybe that's why he was like, hey, guys, I'm out. You don't have any commitment to really anybody. And I'm just going to be the first draft that deserts this sinking ship because you're Cleveland, you suck, bye. And I can't blame him for the way he left Cleveland. I really can't. I would have left Cleveland too because it's Cleveland. It's the Browns. They suck. They still suck. They're going to suck for a while. There's nothing good about Cleveland. I can't blame him for that. And then he comes here and Matt Ryan has trouble adjusting. And Matt Ryan even used the same exact analogy that I used where it's like going from one language to another when you're learning this new offense. It's really tough. So I think the Falcons finally have a quarterback who's comfortable in the offense. He's comfortable with his O-line protecting him. He's comfortable with his run game. And Shanahan can just call whatever the hell he wants, and Ryan will get it done at this point. And I think Shanahan trusts Ryan a little bit more to run that no-huddle because Ryan does know the offense a little more.
Yeah, I was never one of those fire Shanahan people. I do feel like he got a lot more flack than he deserved over the last year. So I was probably spending more time defending Shanahan than criticizing him. I do think some of the criticisms of him were fair, but I do think people tend to take it a little too far and sort of saying everything about our offense is great except for Kyle Shanahan. Now, at the same time, my expectations going into this season was that the offense would be better, but I didn't think it would be this good. Like the way they're playing this year is kind of what I sort of expected them to do maybe next season if everything worked out for them. I just didn't expect this level of consistency. I sort of expected them when they were good, when everything was clicking, they would be this good, but it wouldn't be consistent. So I can certainly say that I certainly underestimated Shanahan, even though I wasn't one of those people that was like, he's the worst human being alive. But yeah, I mean, like they're doing exactly what they want to do offensively. This is what the offense best. This is basically the best case scenario for their offense. So, you know, kudos to Shanahan for getting it done. You know, hopefully he can keep it going. Markel Jefferson asks, is this Atlanta Falcons team better than the 2012 Falcons team?
If they can keep it up, if this offense can keep it up, I think it is. And if the defense can really get going with the pass rush consistently and hit that 30 to 33 sack rate that they're on pace for right now, I definitely think that they can. I think that 2012 team didn't have a running game, and that's why they lost in the NFC Championship game. I think if you give that 2012 team this year's running game, that team goes to the Super Bowl, wins the Super Bowl, not even a question. But we can't do that. We can't travel back in time. I do think it's a more varied offense. I do think the defense has potential to be better, especially when everybody's healthy. Is it better than the 12 team? I think so. I think it can be. The question is whether they can sustain.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the offense is definitely better than the 2012 offense. I said that earlier. I think there's a massive gap right now between where this defense is, or at least where this defense has been over the last 5 weeks, not necessarily coming off of this Denver game.
Yeah.
Between the 2012 team, and that 2012 team didn't really have a great defense, but the main difference is that 2012 team could defend the pass. This year's team hasn't been very good at defending the pass. And, you know, that matters in this league because, as you hear constantly, it's a passing league. So I think the pass defense has to make improvements on that side of the ball to compare to the 2012 defense. And, you know, I think if you were combining them, like the gap between the 2012 offense and this year's offense is smaller than I think the gap between the 2012 defense and this year's defense. Now, if the defense continues to play like they have the last 2 weeks for the rest of the season, that gap on defense will shrink and be non-existent. And we'll talk about this year's defense being better than that 2012 defense. But until we see that more consistently, I won't say that this year's team is better than the 2012 team yet. But I think overall, but I do think they certainly have the capacity to be so, as Scott said. Markwell Jefferson asked, could this offense of the Atlanta Falcons have any success against the Vikings defense?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The Vikings aren't this unbeatable defense, unbeatable team. I honestly think the Seattle defense is better than the Vikings defense. Yeah, and I know that's going to sound crazy to some, but I do. I think it's a much better – I think the Seattle defense is a much better defense than the Vikings defense. I think the Vikings defense has holes, mainly in stopping the run, more than anything else. It's just their offense gets ahead of people very quickly. They create turnovers very easily. And that's where they're really winning games. The Vikings have forced 12 turnovers, and their offense has only given away 1. The Vikings kind of feel a lot like last year's Falcons team. You feel like something's going to drop, and they're going to start losing games really soon, really quickly. And you don't know when that is, but you know it's going to happen just because there's something imperfect about that team. And when you kind of look at their schedule, they're like, yeah, they beat the Titans, they beat the Panthers, they beat the Giants, they beat the Texans, they beat the Packers. None of the teams that they beat, you're going, man, this team was great. They beat a world-beating team. They beat a top 10 team. I think they beat up on a lot of crappy competition. I think they beat up on a lot of bad teams. And we're seeing just how bad the Panthers are now. And I think that's exactly what the Vikings have done, is they beat a lot of bad teams. I think their first real test is this week, going into Philly. I think they're going to have a couple other tests once they get, into their division schedule a little bit more. But they really have an easy schedule. And they'll probably be like a 12-14 just because they're playing the AFC South. They're playing the Bears, the Lions. They get the NFC East. And they've already been through part of the NFC East. I think they get the Cowboys, and that's one of their tough games too. But there's not really a team that you're like, man, this is a really tough Viking schedule. I think if the Falcons played them in the playoffs, they would match up really well with them, especially with their defense. Yeah, there's a great pass rush, but I think they got the tight ends to take advantage of the linebackers. They've got the running backs to force, poor defensive play. They've got the offensive line that can create holes and they can run against them. And I think it's just a good overall team. I think Atlanta could beat them. I'll put it that way. I think Atlanta could beat them.
Yeah, I think you're right that Atlanta can beat the Vikings. I do think they match up a little bit better against the Falcons offense than Seattle does. Just because I think they have a little bit, I think Anthony Barr is a difference maker, a little bit more athletic than any linebacker that Seattle has other than maybe Bobby Wagner. So I do feel like if they were going to put him on an island against Coleman, he could probably do better than most linebackers. Not to say that he'll stop Tevin Coleman or anything, but I feel like that's not a matchup that the Falcons will exploit as easily as they could against other teams. I think they have a better pass rush. I think they have a more complete pass rush, I would say, because I think they have 4 or 5 good defensive linemen as opposed to Seattle, who I think only really has like 3. And I feel like, Xavier Rhodes has done a better job against Julio Jones than probably any cornerback in the league other than maybe Josh Norman the last 2 years. And Julio hasn't really had an impact in those Viking games because Rhodes has done a good job and Harrison Smith is really good. So, whether the Falcons will beat the Vikings in January or whatever, I'll wait till January to talk about that. But I think the Falcons certainly could beat the Vikings. I do feel like the Vikings defense probably, just because of, I think they're really solid at all 3 levels and they're well coached and they're disciplined and they don't make mistakes. I think they could probably have a little bit more success against the Falcons defense than some of these other teams we've seen. But, we won't know that answer until January if at any point. So we'll see. We got a couple of Jalen Collins questions. Marquell Jefferson asked, what are your thoughts about Jalen Collins? May2124 asked, will Collins play this week at outside cornerback with Alford in a nickel? And Jerry Walker asked, if Collins moves Alford to the slot, will we see fewer cheap hand fouls from Alford?
All right. Thoughts on Jalen Collins? Until Jalen Collins proves that he's worth playing over Poole, over Alford, over anybody, you keep him at that 4th cornerback spot. Yeah, you play him over C.J. Goodwin because C.J. Goodwin's not great, but I don't see a way where Jalen Collins is a top 3 corner on this team right now. And I know people are going to be like, but Alford gets penalties. Alford may get like 1 penalty a game, whatever, no big deal. I'm not as worried about Alford as I am about Collins. Alford may get a penalty a game. Collins allows a lot of yards in a game.
Yeah, I'm more concerned about yards than penalties. I agree with that.
I'll take the 1 penalty a game and 2 catches for 30 yards that Alford allows over the 85 yards and a touchdown that Collins allows every day of the week. And people are just mad about Alford because he's not as good as Trufant. I hate to break it to you. There's only 4 cornerbacks in the NFL right now that are as good as Trufant. And Atlanta just played a team with 2 of them.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't have any thoughts on Jalen Collins because we haven't really seen him play this year. Like, he had an okay preseason. He had some good plays. Like, I don't have any thoughts on him. So until we see him play, I'm not going to have any thoughts on him. I don't expect the Falcons to move Collins to the nickel cornerback until we see Poole really struggle. Even if Alford continues to have these sort of brain farts that we've seen this year, he's not getting benched. Like, he would have to, he basically got to be Ben Abe and Wickerweed before we saw that happen. So, and truth be told, even if he had 1 horrible game where he gave up 200 yards, I still feel like he would still be the starter because, that's the way Alford plays. He's a boom-bust sort of guy. There are going to be times where he's going to give up a big play or he's going to make a bonehead decision, but then there's going to be times where he gets a game-winning pick 6. And, it's a boom-bust sort of thing. And, I don't feel like Jalen Collins has shown that he's that type of player. I don't think Brian Poole's that type of player. Brian Poole's more like Robert McClain in 2012 a solid, disciplined player, but he's not going to be this lockdown guy. He's a slot guy. He's a 5'9" slot guy, a
He's
zone
not
guy.
5'9".
He's 5'9".
No, he's not.
Brian Poole?
Brian Poole is not 5'9". He's 5'11".
He's not 5'11". He's 5'9".
The guys at the combine would disagree.
Okay. I need to look this up. I'm sorry.
Sorry, 5'10".
5'9" and 5'8".
Whatever.
There you
Still,
go.
he plays bigger than that. He plays like a safety.
Well, I mean, that's about the same size that McLean was. That's the same size as Grimes
He's the
was.
same size as Allen. Honestly, I'm more disappointed in Allen than I am in anybody else. I think Poole could go back and play safety this year.
Yeah.
If they really want to force Jalen Collins in the starting lineup for 2017 after this year, I wouldn't be shocked if Brian Poole did move back to safety and competed with Allen, because Poole has been a very good all-around defensive back. He's played well in the nickel. Maybe the Falcons have their own, destitute man's Tyrann Mathieu. Now, keep in mind, I said destitute. So,
Yeah, I got you.
Like Tyrann Mathieu, best safety in the NFL. Brian Poole could be average.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, so I think Jalen Collins will get an opportunity later this season. Whether that's due to attrition, whether that's due to poor play from somebody else, or just the Falcons wanting to give him an opportunity. Because there's a favorable game where there's a matchup where we face some team that has a really good slot corner and we want to get Alfred on him as opposed to Poole. I think we'll see Collins before the year's up, but until we do, I don't really care about Jalen Collins. Basically play some special teams, make some tackles at this point, and then we'll see what happens in the future.
Yep.
We got a couple of Ishmael questions. Jonathan Moulton asked, do you think we could move Ish to linebacker on a permanent basis and have him bulk up a little, or should he stay in the hybrid backup role? And Champagne Sappy asked, Kamal played well at weak side linebacker. Is our linebacker core Campbell at strong side, Jones middle, Kamal weak side feasible moving forward?
The first question, I do like the idea of moving Ish to linebacker. I don't think he needs to bulk up. He looks like he's about 225, 230 pounds as it is. He looked fine. I thought at weak side linebacker he was doing a good job. Keep him in that role until Campbell comes back. Now when Campbell comes back, then you have the question, what do you do? I still think you got to keep Campbell on the field over Ish. Now, stay in a hybrid backup role. I do like the idea of him coming in big nickel situations, like what Champagne Sappy's suggesting, where Kamal plays weak side linebacker, Campbell plays strong, Jones plays middle. I think in a situation like that, you're probably playing more of your standard 4-3 set, though. And you're saying, hey, we've got to cover these tight ends. And the idea is maybe you're running that 4-2-5 nickel, but you're covering tight ends, and you're forcing people to say, hey, we're going to beat you with our running game. We're going to beat you with, our wide receivers. And if the Falcons can turn into a team that takes away tight ends, that'll be great.
Yeah, I mean, look, Scott's right. Ish bulked up last year to about 220, 225, so he doesn't need to add any more weight. I know he's still listed at like 206 or 208 or whatever, but he's much bigger than that. Like I've been in the past, I've been very critical of Kamal Ishmael because I think he has some limitations. I think he's an excellent backup player. I think he's an excellent role player. But I do sometimes get into this mode because I think people have a tendency to be like, oh, Kamal Ishmael does a really good job as a role player. Let's give him more to do. And I feel like we've seen that happen before. And I think like there's a ceiling on how good a player Kamal Ishmael can be if you start asking him to play 50, 60, 70 snaps a game. So seeing him as a permanent option at weak side linebacker, in a pinch for a month, if Campbell's out, then yeah, sure, that's great. It's wonderful. For permanently moving forward, I don't really go that far. I think he's much better as a role player. Why, he's fine. Like it's one of those things where like I think Campbell gives you a lot more because what Ishmael is really good at is coming downhill and defending the run. Once you start asking him to play a little bit more in space, once you start asking him to play more man coverage, I think some of the issues that he has tend to get exposed a little bit more. So I feel like playing him as a weak side linebacker permanently, long term, it's just probably not going to work out because I feel like you can get a better player there. So like I like Campbell staying at weak side linebacker. I like Jones at middle linebacker. I like Beasley getting a little bit more opportunities at the strong side and base defense. So I'm fine with our linebacker core as it is. Jerry Walker asks, what is the main driver of stronger D-line play in the last 2 weeks?
Sometimes a unit just has to develop a little bit of chemistry. I think the fact that Freeney came in towards the middle of camp helped out, but when you have, everybody back on that same page, when they're rushing on the right side, they know what they're doing. When they're rushing on the left side, it looks like Shelby and Beasley look like they've gotten it together. Basically, the strength of the pass rush the last 2 weeks, the strength of the stronger defensive line play, is Derek Shelby showing up and looking like the guy he was in Miami. It's Dwight Freeney and Adrian Claiborne getting on the same page on the pass rush on the right side. It's the defensive line in the base looking really good just because they look good. Like, I think Jarrett and Hageman and Jackson and Babineau, those guys in the base do well together because they fit well together. They look like a unit that's coming in to stop the run, and that's their goal. And I think they do well. There needs to be more pass rush from that base unit, and I do think that's the one thing the Falcons might go after in the draft this coming year. I think you'll see what is going on.
Oh, I don't know. I was checking Twitter for more questions. Sorry.
I think you'll see the Falcons go after a strong pass rusher that can fit that Dwight Freeney role and potentially that Leo in the base next year. But I don't know if there's going to be that guy this year. But they need to get more pass rush out of the base.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Brian Cox isn't as terrible a coach. Maybe that has something to do with it. But no, I think overall, I think Scott's right. It's basically Beasley and Shelby showing up. I said that earlier. I think that's the main reason. Those guys aren't playing like backups. They're playing like starters and good starters. So I think that's the main reason why the defensive line has improved this last couple of weeks. Jerry Walker asks, will Mohamed Sanu's shoulder be hurt all season without surgery?
Man, I don't know. I'm not a doctor.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth, Scott. I don't know.
I don't know what his injury is. Didn't he just sprain his shoulder? I don't know. He'll probably be fine in 2 weeks. Just relax, dude. It's a shoulder injury. It's not going to heal overnight. It's not going to heal over a 2 week span. He got it week 2, week 3 against the Saints.
Yeah, I don't know. I could sit here and speculate, but I really have no clue.
He got it in the Saints game. That was week 3. So, it takes more than 2 weeks for a sprained shoulder to heal. I'm assuming he probably sprained the AC joint right there because he's still playing. So he probably didn't tear anything, probably didn't, get anything too severe. So I would assume that it'll probably be this week that he's back to full health because it takes a couple weeks for that AC joint to fully heal.
Champagne Sappy asks thoughts on the fact that all 3 of our next opponents come off bye weeks before playing us.
I mean, not really bye weeks for the Chargers or the Packers. They're Thursday night football weeks. I think it's tougher to come off a Thursday night football week than it is to come off a bye week. And I think it's tougher to come off a Thursday night football week than it is to come off of any other week, really. It's nice having those extra couple of days of rest, but it's really tough on your body to play those 2 games in 5 days. It really is. I don't think it's a good fit. I don't think it's good that the Falcons play these guys, these 3 teams coming right off of a short week or coming off of longer weeks. But I don't think it's necessarily a help for them either. They get a couple more days of rest. They get a couple more days of game planning, but they don't really get anything. Sometimes you can overthink yourself, and I think that's what they're doing. What can happen, especially with the Chargers. The Chargers suck. They find ways to lose.
Yeah, look, I don't think the bye week boost is as big a deal as it once was. It's not obviously it doesn't put the Falcons in the best situation because teams get a couple more days of rest. Maybe a key player gets back healthy that wouldn't have been if it was a regular week. It gives them a couple more days to game plan against the Falcons and sort of exploit some weaknesses that they may or may not have. So it certainly doesn't give the Falcons an advantage, but I don't think it's a massive disadvantage either. Now, I expect the Falcons to lose one of these games coming up eventually. Whether it's Seattle, whether it's San Diego, probably least likely to be San Diego or Green Bay. Now, I've been thinking that for most of the season, so I certainly could be wrong. They could continue to keep winning. But I don't expect the Falcons to finish this year 15-1, basically, is what I'm saying. So eventually they'll slip up and they'll play a bad game at some point, and we'll move on and it'll be to next week. So no big deal. All right. I think we had a couple of other mailbag questions from Ryan O'Brien, but I hope we got his questions answered because we did talk quite a bit about them. So sorry, Ryan, if you were begging for us to answer your questions specifically, but if you watched the rest of the show, you should have heard it. If you guys want to submit mailbag questions for next week's show, you can use the hashtag Falcons Mailbag. You can tweet at me.
I just looked at his questions. You cool if we go ahead and answer this one real quick?
Okay.
So his question is, what's the key to the team's success so far? To him, it's Alex Mack. Ryan gets time. The line plays together.
What are your thoughts on that, Scott?
I mean, I agree that Alex Mack has been a huge addition. I think the key to the team's success, though, is more they're comfortable with each other. They're comfortable with the offense. Yeah, Alex Mack is awesome to have. He's a huge upgrade in the offense. But I think Shanahan and the team is just more comfortable with each other this year. That more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to narrow it down to one thing. I think the fact that we haven't had that many turnovers, I feel like Matt Ryan's probably thrown 6 or 7 passes that probably should have been picked off, but because they haven't been picked off, I think that's helped the team. I think the running game has been great. I think Alex Mack has a big part of that. I think the pass protection has been pretty good, if not great. I think Alex Mack has something to do with that as well. I think the fact that talked about earlier, other guys other than Julio Jones are creating offense for this team, and this team isn't basically relying on Julio Jones to either make plays or create opportunities for other players. I think that's been a big part of their success. So, yeah, I feel like there's a bunch of keys to the game. I think Alex Mack has been a big part of that. Whether he's the number one key, he's in the top 3 or 4 certainly. So that's a fair thing of saying. So I wouldn't dispute anybody that thinks he's the key, but he's up there. Okay, so that'll do it for the mailbag questions. As I was saying earlier, if you want to submit a question for next week's show, use the hashtag Falcons Mailbag. If you can tweet at me, I'm at FalcFans. Scott is at Karasik S. Check out Scott's editorial stuff at Blogging Dirty. You can check out my stuff at FalcFans.com. Be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes. Give us a rating. Give us 5 stars. That helps more people find us. You can check us out on Stitcher as well. You can find the links to all the podcast links and find our archives at profootballcentral.com as well. And we'll be back next week, probably Tuesday, 6 o'clock, to discuss the Seahawks game and talk about the Chargers, Phillip Rivers, and how amazing Phillip Rivers is. But we'll see you guys next week.